Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Hello, friends. Happy Tuesday. Welcome into Soccer Morning, backheel.com. Hope your morning is going well. We are live and on the air, and we're talking soccer today. Just to mix it up a little bit, we're going to spend the next hour and change talking about the beautiful game. Got a couple of very good guests on the show for you today. Neil Morris joins us to talk about the NASL. Will join us to do just that. He's at WRALSportsFan.com, and he is the host of the Inverted Triangle, which is a North Carolina soccer pod on WRAL Sports. So look for that. Also, Tom Marshall, our friend who covers Mexican soccer. My new LinkedIn connection, Tom Marshall. He and I linked in together today. I don't know what that means exactly. I imagine it means that now he'll help me with my professional career. I think that's how LinkedIn works, right? All right, so we'll talk about Mexican soccer with Tom. They've got the return leg, if you so to speak, with the Canada tonight at the Azteca after taking care of Canada up in Vancouver on Friday night. Mexico looking strong in World Cup qualifying. Meanwhile, the United States does not, and that leads our headlines, of course. The United States facing Guatemala in a must-win World Cup qualifier tonight, fourth round of CONCACAF qualifying, Mapfre Stadium in Columbus, Ohio. Head coach Jurgen Klinsmann, obviously, we came back not with the result we wanted in Guatemala. That is not a very good Klinsmann impersonation. I will try harder. It makes the situation very clear. We need to win this game. I'm calling him the embattled head coach of the U.S. men's national team at this point, Jurgen Klinsmann. I don't think that that's wrong to say. He had a couple of other comments ahead of this game. We had plenty of chances to turn the game around in Guatemala to at least equalize. There's a sense of urgency around tomorrow night because we need to get 3 points now. In this situation, he did address the quote-unquote playing of players out of position. He said he did not do that, despite the issues with DeAndre Yedlin and Jeff Cameron and maybe even a couple of other players. He basically says these guys should be playing multiple positions anyway, so we're not playing them out of position. Fair enough. Ticket sales for the game in the traditionally strong market of Columbus have been slow. Although, based on my research, this appears to be more about ticket prices than anything to do with the national team and their status at the moment. Ticket prices for a similar game 4 years ago, roughly $30 cheaper. So maybe inflation has hit. I don't know. The US U23s faced Colombia in the return leg of their playoff tie against Colombia with a chance to go to the Olympics on the line. That tie is tied 1-1. Luis Gil with the goal down in Colombia. The Americans now, with that away goal, will hope to see this out and make their way to Brazil this summer under head coach Andy Herzog. It will be the first time the United States has qualified for the Olympics since 2008 in Beijing. Liverpool has remained quiet after a document released at Football Leaks showed that the club was paid as much as £10 million less for Luis Suarez than originally reported. I'm not sure this is actually news, but it is interesting. The document published at Football Leaks alleges that the fee for the player's July 2014 transfer to Barcelona was £64.98 million. Again, £10 million less than what was originally reported. The alleged paperwork also states that Liverpool are still owed a final payment of £12.98 million from the Spanish club, which is due on July 31st. I imagine that some of this is about PR, about selling the notion that Luis Suarez returned to the club more money than was actually paid or will be actually paid. Although the world of football transfer is already murky enough as it is, let's not muddy the waters further. The money is insane. Former Honduran President Rafael Callejas, 72 years old, Callejas, pleaded guilty in U.S. federal court to charges he solicited bribes while a member of FIFA's television and marketing committee, so that's fun. He also agreed to forfeit $650,000 payable within a year for his role in a system so corrupt that hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal payments were made over the past quarter century. I knew it was wrong for me to ask and to accept such undisclosed payments, Callejas told U.S. Magistrate Judge Robert M. Levy. He said he distributed a significant portion of his bribes to delegates of the Honduran Federation so he could remain its president, a position he held from 2002 until last August. He was also president of the nation of Honduras from 1990 to 1994. He will be sentenced on August 5th, and he could face up to 40 years in prison. All right. Games today, because it is still the FIFA international break. You actually have a couple of results over in Asia. I believe Australia has advanced to the next round of Asian Football Confederation World Cup qualifying with a 5-1 win over Jordan. Japan beating Syria 5-0. Despite that fact, Syria has advanced. It's a pretty remarkable achievement considering the political situation in that. Political is not the right word, but the situation in Syria. Also, you obviously have CONCACAF qualifying besides the United States and Guatemala. Honduras facing El Salvador in Honduras. Trinidad and Tobago versus St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Panama, Haiti. Costa Rica, Jamaica. Mexico, Canada, the aforementioned game. A host of international friendlies across the continent of Europe, including France and Russia, Germany and Italy, England and the Netherlands, Ireland, Slovakia, Greece, Iceland, Macedonia, Bulgaria. That's the one you want to watch. Portugal against the number one country in the world. Belgium, obviously dealing with the issues back at home in Brussels after the terrible attacks last week. So lots on their minds, I imagine. I believe Wilmots will be playing an experimental lineup. Not much to lose for the Belgians in that friendly. CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying. Colombia versus Ecuador. Uruguay versus Peru. That game at 7 o'clock tonight. Argentina hosts Bolivia at 7:30. Venezuela, Chile, 7:30 as well. Paraguay facing Brazil at 8:45. All right, there's a good roundup of what's happening in the world of football. We will take our break. We will come back. We will have Neil Morris, WRALSportsFan.com. Join us to talk about the NASL season, which gets underway in just a couple of days. Stay right there. Soccer Morning, Bacchio.com.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we're back on Soccer Morning on a Tuesday. Coming up this weekend, the launch of the 2016 North American Soccer League 2.0 season. I say 2.0, we could say the new NASL, or we could just say NASL, because there's a lot of people who don't even remember that there was a first NASL, Neil Morris from WRALSportsFan.com. You can find him on Twitter at @ByNeilMorris. And you're doing a podcast now, Neil?
I am. I was inspired by your interview with NASL.com where you said that podcasters become bloggers to get more attention to what they do. So, yeah.
Right, there you go.
I've launched a podcast, the Inverted Triangle Soccer Podcast, here in Raleigh, North Carolina.
See, and that works on a couple of different levels. Raleigh, Durham being the triangle. Okay, there you go. I get it. It's very clever, Neil. All right, so
there's layers. There's layers to that title. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It works. It works perfectly. All right. So we have again the 2016 season coming up this weekend. I had a chance to talk with Bill Peterson, who Bill's very good about getting around and talking to everybody who has any particular interest in NASL. Like every other season, Neil, this one's bringing change to the North American Soccer League. We're in year 6. Is that right?
We are. Depending on how you calculate it, the 2010 season was kind of a hybrid sort of sanctioned year where everybody kind of had to play nice, but the full split started in 2011, yeah.
Yeah, so we're headed into year 6 here. So much of what happens from the final whistle of one year until the start of the next season is off the field stuff, and not just signing of players and the like. It's working out ownership in some places. It's new expansion teams, and before we get into the favorites and who looks strong so far headed into the year, Neil, I suppose we have to get some of that business out of the way. Let's start with your hometown team, the team in your backyard, the Carolina Railhawks. They were part of the Traffic Sports Group. They were unfortunately embroiled in all of that just by association, and finally been cleared of that by virtue of a new ownership. How are things looking in Carolina?
It's an era of good feelings here. New owner, Steve Malik, is an area tech entrepreneur. He owns a sort of a physician-patient thing that you see here in the RTP area. And he has an affinity for soccer. He grew up a few hours east in a small town called Kinston, and he was one of several groups who were courted, or whom he courted, to purchase the team, and he ended up being the one who bought it. There's been a rejuvenation among the fan base, let's put it that way. Malik has been doing the yeoman's work of getting around and meeting everyone he needs to meet. There's been an injection of not just energy but money into the budget. Of course, there was such a deficit on the budgetary side of things that any increase would have been noticeable. But having local ownership, it's a big topic of conversation of whether you need local ownership or not. And kind of where I come down on this is that if you have a team, in any SL team, let's put it that way, in a large metropolitan area like New York or Los Angeles, you can get away with outside investors if you have good local people on the ground. In large but sort of still medium-sized markets like Raleigh, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, places like that, it really is indispensable to have the owner, the person cutting the checks, being someone of the area who knows the people on the Chamber of Commerce, who knows the civic leaders, who can pick up the phone and call the movers and shakers. That's the most indispensable part of Malik's introduction in Carolina, that he's been doing those things instead of it always being surrogates for an absentee owner. That's the big deal. I think fans are going to see a big difference in off the field and amenities around the stadium. Still remains to be seen how the performance will be on the field. The roster's much deeper than it's been in previous years. But yes, there's a big difference around Carolina. I think the remaining question is we'll see how the regular season attendance stacks up. I can tell you the spring season marketing budget for Carolina is 3 times the total marketing budget for the team last year.
Wow.
So that gives you an indication of how the times aura changes.
Nothing like a little bit of enthusiasm and new investment to get things rolling again. It's good to see that the new owner is putting his money where his mouth is on that front. So we'll see what happens in Carolina. In Carolina, not one of the legacy teams in the sense that they're not trading on an old NASL name, but certainly a legacy team in the sense they've been around for a while. And I think it's important for NASL to hold on and keep those teams going and strong. That there's a battle of attrition happening here. They've lost the Atlanta Silverbacks this year.
That's right. Kind of, if you're not from here, you might not know that this is actually the Railhawks' 10th season coming up. They've been around for a decade, and geographically, they're important. There's a couple of pro teams, both between NASL and USL in Carolina, 3 actually. But Carolina's an important team geographically. They've got one of the best facilities in the league, if not the best facility. They're an important team to keep around. And, this is another topic for another day. If you believe some credible winds that are blowing, there is more than a modicum of interest by MLS in putting a team in the Carolinas in the next round of expansion. So who knows where that's going to lead. So, keeping the Railhawks going is important. And frankly, the Raleigh market, while it's not Portland or Seattle, is a vibrant soccer hotbed that needs to be tapped into properly.
Absolutely, lots of talented kids playing soccer in that part of the world these days. So you definitely need a pro outlet. All right, so Carolina's ownership situation is sorted. Again, the Silverbacks have gone away. Just in terms of the behind the scenes, I mean, we spent a lot of last year talking about whether or not the Silverbacks were going to go away, Neil, and there was a question about funding them again, and ultimately they decided to call it quits in 2016. Why now? Why? I think there's an NPSL version coming, or maybe even starting. I haven't checked up on that recently, but why now rather than play one more year ahead of the Atlanta MLS launch?
As best I can tell, the owners didn't want to foot the bill anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
It was a league-owned team, and each team was paying between $200,000 and $250,000 per team, which at the NASL level is not chump change. And they didn't, frankly, see any light at the end of the tunnel. There's an MLS team, Atlanta United, that's coming presumably next year. That's already saturating the market, even in one the size of Atlanta, even with its checkered pro sports landscape. And the owners around the league just felt like that it had reached to a point where there wasn't any hope of finding additional ownership. I think if they could have found someone who would have bought the team, they would have kept plowing ahead in Atlanta, but there obviously wasn't any prospects on the horizon. This was not a situation like Minnesota back when Bill McGuire was recruited, where they kept the team going for a couple of years. Kept the team going for a few years, knowing the value of the Minnesota market, but also knowing that they could keep doing that with no one coming in. Here, there was no prospects. MLS is coming, and the teams were tired of putting a sizable bill in a league where budgets are increasing every year.
Neil, when you say that the league kept Minnesota United going, what we're saying is that the league, as a proxy for Traffic Sports, kept them going.
Well, NSC Minnesota was league-owned.
Right.
Year.
Okay. Yes. Right.
Now, how much of that finance was coming from Traffic Sports remains an open and unanswered question, and may remain that way. But technically, the Minnesota franchise was league-owned in its final year before Bill McGuire operated the team. And I do know that teams around the league were contributing to keep that team going. And I can tell you that Minnesota was on death's door until David Downs, the former commissioner of the NASL, recruited Bill McGuire and under a pretty good deal to come in and assume that team, and the rest is history. And now Minnesota's getting ready to go there.
Yeah, well, that leads me to a question about whether or not the league and some of these other ownership groups see a situation in Minnesota as, I mean, is that, how do they view that? Because certainly Minnesota has been a strong team, a boon to the league. Obviously putting a player in the U.S. men's national team is great PR for them, but they're losing that market now because Bill McGuire and really it's interesting to see the dynamics of this because it certainly looks as though the ownership group of Minnesota United knows they have no choice, that the Vikings would put an MLS team in that market if they don't move on it. So how does the league view all of that money they spent on Minnesota in light of the fact they're going to lose the market anyway?
Interesting question. I think at the league front office level, among the league hierarchy, I suspect that they wished, even however much folly this is, that Minnesota United had remained in ESL and just plowed ahead against any MLS wins that came blowing through. That's what they wished they had done. They knew that this was a strong franchise with a strong owner, and that's what they wanted to do. And I suspect that some of the younger owners around the league and some of the more ambitious newcomers probably wished the same thing. That being said, I've spoken to more than one owner and front office person around this league, and I think the consensus regarding Minnesota is that they fully understand why they're doing it and what they're doing it and probably would have done the same thing. Yeah. It's a situation where MLS was coming to town. The Vikings group looked like they were the odds-on favorite, and it was kill or be killed. And Bill McGuire, who is respected in the boardroom at the NESL level, I know that. Whether their aim was always Major League Soccer or not, it became a situation where it was either where they were going to go head-to-head or they were going to join. And so they did what they needed to do. And the rest of these owners around the league are businessmen. They understand the realities of business. And so I think the maneuver that Bill McGuire pulled is something they frankly admire, and frankly, if the same thing happened to them, they would have attempted the same thing.
Well, that's interesting. You paint them that way because I wonder. Look, every group, and certainly these are strong-willed individuals who are successful for a reason of personality in a lot of cases, and certainly intelligence. I wonder if there is a disconnected divide in the way that NASL is positioning itself from an administrative situation, like the Bill Petersons of the world, versus what some of these ownership groups are willing to do. Because at the very least, it seems as though NASL is priming itself for a fight and willing to dive in. They certainly moved quickly on Miami, Neil, and we'll get to them. We know that Peter Wilt's in Chicago right now, scheming up a team in that town. So what is there one direction for this league, or do we actually have maybe a difference of opinion on how to go forward?
I'm sure there's a difference of opinion, maybe based on personality, maybe based on how each owner acquired their fortunes. But some of it may be just based on what each owner's tolerance of a fight is. I mean, some have more money than others, to be quite frank about it. And so the Edmontons of the world may not have the same fortitude about these sort of things as the Cosmos ownerships of the world. What seems to have happened to me, I mean, look, I interviewed Bill Peterson a couple of weeks ago, and he will tell you, and I think with some credibility, that a lot of the current growth that you talked about, or the inroads that the league is making, is sort of the organic progress of a burgeoning league. That's probably true. But frankly, I think it's hard to not take notice that the potential expansion markets of this league have shifted over the last 12 to 18 months from the Hamiltons, the Hartfords, the El Pasos of the world, the Albuquerques, to places like Chicago, L.A., Miami, San Francisco. That seems to be where the league is casting its eye. Now, is that a function of these are where wealthy owners come from, or where wealthy owners want to go? Is it a function of the league positioning itself to be in large markets to satisfy potential D1 sanctioning standards? Is it the league positioning itself to broaden its broadcast footprint as large as possible to justify new broadcast deals? It's probably all of it. And it's not dissimilar to what a league like MLS did during its infancy. And frankly, it's probably the league doing the type of things it need to do for owners, going back to your original question, to attempt to increase the value of their property. We've seen some owners sell teams. We've seen some owners try to leverage the footprint or the cachet of the league, whether it's getting new broadcast deals or sponsorships. I mean, it all becomes a big circle at some point. And at the end of the day, these owners have one goal in mind, and that is increasing the value of their asset. And whether that's someone like Gordon Hartman who builds a stadium and then flips it for a profit down in San Antonio, or whether it's Bill McGuire who finds the golden ticket to MLS, or whether it's an owner somewhere who eventually sells to someone else for a higher price than the expansion fee that they paid originally. There's different ways to extract value, and at the end of the day, I think there's a commonality of purpose behind that.
All right, so you mentioned a couple of things there that I want to get into, and certainly the television situation before we dive into the season. And I've only got 10 minutes, so let's move quickly. Let's start. It's all right. Let's start with the expansion situation. Things look great in Oklahoma City, at least in terms of the team they're putting together. Are they going to be successful off the field? Any word on how that's coming together?
Well, it's going to be interesting. Again, I refer back, Bill Peterson is always bullish about the prospects of these expansion teams. And he said nothing to dissuade the fact that he thinks these teams are going to have good initial first years. I mean, Miami and OKC. But when I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, and then he reiterated this on a media conference call last week, he really dampened the expectations from an attendance point of view. I mean, he didn't necessarily say these are going to be poor draws, but he made a point of pointing out and confirming that these teams had shorter run-ups than teams like Jacksonville, Indy 11, Ottawa, even San Antonio going back several years before their rollout. And I suspect there were particular reasons for that shorter window. But he went out, instead of just doing the same line that, we think things are great and we're looking forward to great seasons there, he said a little of that, but also tinged it with a dampening of expectations. So I think regardless of who's hearing what, I think the concern is that it's going to be a typical first year for an expansion team. I don't think they're expecting an Indy 11 or a Jacksonville Armada down there. Drawing 8,000 to 10,000 fans. We could be wrong, but going to Oklahoma City, they've got a unique situation. They're going into a market that already has an established USL team, OKC Energy, who have done very well in the market from all appearances. OKC Energy plays at Taft Stadium, which is generally downtown Oklahoma City. Rayo OKC is going to be playing at a high school facility somewhere removed from downtown. So, I still think it's going to be difficult, especially the first year. They especially Oklahoma City. I mean, it was only about 5 months or so between the formal announcement of the club and their kickoff. So, will they have a decent draw? I suspect so, but it's not going to be sort of these boffo expansion efforts like we've seen in other years. Somebody's spending a lot of money on players, that's for sure. But I don't think we're going to see these eye-opening first years like we have the last several years.
All right, what about Miami? That's the other team entering in the spring season.
I think it's in the same similar boat. Miami doesn't have necessarily a team to compete with, although Fort Lauderdale's just up the road. But it's Miami, and everybody knows that the difficulty of that market. They also had a limited run-up. People on the ground there tell me that the marketing has been spotty at best. They have spent a ton of money on players, probably overpaid for players, and I've got some insight on that. And I think they've accumulated a better roster than people are giving them credit for. But as far as I think Miami will, based on some of the names in their coaching staff and some of the names they're putting on the field, I think they're going to have a good initial draw. I think there's going to be some interest, especially since the MLS effort is still floundering a bit down there. But in the long run of the season, I don't know if they have they've done the groundwork to have again a season like Indy 11 or Jacksonville or San Antonio when they entered the league.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the drawing through names. Obviously they're owned by Paolo Maldini. I don't know how many times he's going to be out there, and they've got Alessandro Nestra who's going to be on the sideline coaching them. But beyond that, I mean, is there any actual name recognition in this team? I'm not sure I see a lot from what the current roster looks like.
Well, I think Wilson Palacios is a decent name. I think he's someone that people who follow EPL, which includes a lot of fans down in Miami, I think that's a name that they know. And I suspect he'll be a relatively decent draw. If you're an NESL follower, there's some players on the roster that like Pablo Campos. But somebody who's going to captivate the market, no, not really beyond Palacios.
Okay, there's a couple of obviously ex-MLSers on this team. Brad Rusin, Blake Smith, Dane Richards. Obviously, people know from his Red Bull days. So there's some talent there, as you said. All right, so that's sort of the expansion situation for the teams coming in to start the year. Now, Puerto Rico FC is targeting a fall start. I asked Bill Peterson about the legitimacy of that. We saw it with the Cosmos. I'm not a big fan of it necessarily, Neil, but I guess if they need a little bit more time, of course, the situation in Puerto Rico leads to a lot of skepticism about this team. Obviously, the Islanders came and went for a very good reason.
Yeah. Well, the Islanders largely went because it was reliant largely on government funding that was spotty from year to year. You never know whether it was coming or not. Presumably, that is not a problem now with Carmelo Anthony and whoever other investors are involved helping put the bill for the team. But the one thing that people on the ground keep telling me, and Commissioner Peterson kind of swats this aside, but everyone tells me that the overall economy in Puerto Rico is such that it's going to inhibit people who are able to buy tickets and go to these games.
I mean, that's the number one reason to be doubtful about this team. I'm making the trip next month to the island for the first time for personal reasons, Neil. But I want to try to, see if I can talk to some people and figure out what's, whether or not there's actual momentum behind this. I think soccer is on the rise in Puerto Rico, but if there's no money coming into the economy, how does that actually help the professional soccer team?
I agree. And entering in the fall season at least doesn't help because you're kind of, I shouldn't say you're picking up scraps. I mean, they've signed some early players or decent, good contributors, but it's going to be tough to find players. It's going to be tough and then if playing the half season doesn't work out from a financial point of view, you'll be behind the eight ball heading into the spring. Again, we go back to the ownership discussion in Carolina a minute ago. Yes, Carmelo Anthony is of the island. His background, his ancestry, he and his wife go back to Puerto Rico, and he has a very popular following there. But he doesn't live there. And so the people on the ground, although some have experience in Puerto Rico and some don't, they're not the owners. They're not the people who know the ins and outs of the government and the civic organizations and the politics of the area, which is indispensable when you start talking about running a sports team in a place like Puerto Rico. I think it's a good market in general. I mean, in that it's a soccer hungry market, and they have the one thing that most expansion teams don't have, and that's access to a stadium, and a good one at that. But people who are far more educated about this just keep telling me how bad the economy is, and they worry that this team is heading into an economic buzzsaw.
Well,
as far as building a following.
I don't know that anything's going to happen before they launch, but let's see if something happens politically to help Puerto Rico. Maybe that'll give the jump start to the economy, and something will happen good. I'm running out of time, Neil, and this is my fault for pushing us. We'll take a couple more minutes here to get to the season preview, but the last thing on the off-season docket here is the television deal. I know it's not officially announced, but I think everyone assumes, and we've even seen some programming notes from DirecTV that indicate beIN Sports is coming.
That's right. And it looks like they're going to be doing a game of the week thing. The interesting thing about this being sports, and let's tie it back to our previous conversation, we talked about the fast run-up for some of these expansion teams, including Miami. I think this being sports deal is probably a byproduct of why Miami FC, owned by Ricardo Silva, was brought in when they were. If they're not
Funny
part
how
of this
that
league,
works.
I question whether this beIN Sports deal comes to fruition. It's why the league doesn't mind having Miami come in with a shorter run-up and maybe a less than optimal marketing run-up, because some of the byproduct is the connections that MP and Silva have along many different avenues, including broadcast connections.
Yeah, well, one of the things, just to jump in here, one of the things we had heard is that CBS Sports was actually in play here. Do you think that beIN Sports is I mean, certainly they know soccer, they do soccer well. I have no doubts about their ability to put together a decent product if they invest in it, but the question is whether or not the reach is as much as NASL wants.
Probably not. And I don't know enough about the background of what went into why one was chosen or one that came to fruition other than the other, but I do believe it's an upgrade over what they had. I think ESPN3 is still going to be around this year. We've already seen some programming populating their, although that hasn't been announced formally either. We've already seen some games this weekend populating their schedule. One World Sports is still around. But beIN Sports, I think, is an upgrade in that it's available on more platforms, maybe not than CBS, obviously, or even CBS Sportsnet, but it's a sports. It's more of a known soccer outlet.
Yes, right.
So people who follow La Liga or World Cup qualifying or whatever, it's a channel they go to, and it has reach across a number of cable and satellite platforms. So it's an upgrade. I have some mild concern about sort of the fragmentation of the league broadcasting, but I think that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, look, and every bit of progress is notable here for a league that started from zero, of course. So they and digital being a central part by necessity, not because they necessarily wanted it to be. Although I think that's probably a wise direction to go in, is having partners who are available. And who do well digitally, whether it's ESPN3 or One World, who I think the news is that One World Sports Game of the Week or whatever they're doing is going to be available to everyone, regardless of whether you subscribe to a package that has One World Sports on your television. So that's progress. Neil, before I have to rush you out of here, let's look at the landscape of the league. We talked about Rayo OKC putting together a strong team based on significant spending. We've looked a little bit at Miami FC. Those are obviously expansion teams. I would imagine that the Cosmos are going to be a favorite again. We didn't talk about San Antonio going away, but they're out of the picture now. Who's the favorite right now?
Well, to my mind, at least just limiting it to the spring season, you've got the Cosmos, who are perennial favorites and have ably replaced and maybe even improved upon the departure of Raul and Marcos Senna with the arrival of folks like Nico Krachar and Juan Arango.
Krachar's a big signing.
They're a professional unit. Minnesota has the ability to score goals in gobs. With the bringing in Stephano Pino and Lance Lang and some other utility players. I have severe questions about their back line and how serious that is going to determine their fortunes. Again, I said last night on another podcast, against all reason and common sense, I'm picking the Tampa Bay Rowdies to win the spring. I know people around the league are very high on Stuart Campbell as a manager. They kept some of their key players. They got rid of some of their knuckleheads in the locker room. And they picked up some really good complementary or even key pieces in some cases, like Tom Heineman. They kept Freddie Adu, who appears to be invested at this point. Khalif Hassan from Minnesota they brought in. They've got a solid lineup from top to bottom. And I think they're the best combination of a team that kept their good pieces while adding good complementary pieces.
Yeah,
so those are the three that I look to be high in the league.
All right, that's interesting for Tampa because they obviously had they had the rough go of things that led to the firing of Qureshi and Rongen and Freddie Adu had come in and now Heineman's an addition he was with Ottawa last year, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
He had a good year at Ottawa and was a key part of their run to the Soccer Bowl final.
Yeah. So Ottawa. So what about the Canadian teams? Obviously, again, Ottawa getting all the way to the final last year. Kind of a surprise package, if I remember correctly. And obviously you have Edmonton, who you mentioned may not necessarily be able to compete financially all the time, but put together a strong home record, if I remember.
They do, and everybody in the Americas will tell you that just going to Canada to play is difficult because of just the logistics of it and the field. The fields are can be difficult to get used to. Everybody, it could be a surprise, but Ottawa shed a lot of players and a lot of budget. It was an off season of upheaval from the manager to their veterans, to everybody. It's a completely overhauled roster, and I think it's probably one that is not going to be performing very well unless something surprises me. Edmonton, same way. They've had continuity at the management position, and they've brought back some key pieces on their defense, but they lost Lance Lang. And that team, with and without Lance Lang, having not replaced him with anybody of even approaching equivalent ability, leaves them in a severe deficit. So, that the prospects on the field for the two Canadian teams are not well, but at the same time, they always have a logistical advantage when teams have to come play them, so they're always going to be somewhere in the mix.
Yeah, we so much more we could talk about. We didn't touch on the strikers at all. We didn't talk about Tony Meola down in Jacksonville. Again, I failed to mention the San Antonio Scorpions going away. There's just so much there. But we will have Neil Morris back, and we will cover those things, and we'll have games to talk about because the season gets underway this weekend. Neil, thank you so much for the time. Good to talk to you as always, and we will definitely be doing this again soon.
Great to be back, Jason.
There goes Neil Morris. Go follow him by Neil Morris on Twitter. Wow. Okay, let's reset. Tom Marshall, Mexico World Cup on Twitter, will join us in just a minute. We'll talk about the Mexican campaign to qualify for 2018. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we waste no time diving straight back in with Tom Marshall, Mexico World Cup on Twitter. You can find his work in many places. You can find him on the Mexican, is it the Mexican football show? I'm sorry, Tom. My brain this morning.
Soccer show.
Mexican. So you guys are calling it soccer. That's throwing me off. Okay, anyway. Tom Marshall from the Mexican Soccer Show and many other outlets. Tom, first of all, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Jason. Yeah, just back the other day from Vancouver, so
I'm a little jealous. That's a place I've never been to. I heard it's beautiful. It was obviously a good night out for the Mexican national team taking care of business against Canada. The way these things work, Tom, is Canada has made some incremental progress recently, and it's good to see. It's good to see for CONCACAF. And there was a little bit of buzz in Canadian soccer circles that maybe, just maybe, if everything went exactly as planned and the bunkering was the right type of bunkering and maybe they got a set piece or something, there could be a shock result here, or at least maybe a draw at home. But Mexico's really good right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a record crowd for a national team game in any sport in Canadian history. Which is pretty incredible when you think about it. I mean, just short of 55,000. So, yeah, there was a massive excitement in Canada. But, yeah, it's one of those games where Canada had a couple of chances in the first 20 minutes. And it's like, if they'd have taken them, then all of a sudden you've got a game on. But when they didn't, Mexico just kind of turned the screw and the pressure was so intense. And I thought it was a brilliant performance from Mexico. I mean, you always get people, especially in Mexico, especially the way the Mexican national team works, will be like, oh, it was 3-0, but, it should have been 5-0, it should have been 6-0. And it's like, Mexico hadn't won up there in Canada since 93. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these places, it's not easy to go there. It's not easy to pick up wins. I mean, like the US in Guatemala. I mean, yeah. These things happen. And Osorio, I thought it was a great performance from Mexico. I really did.
So the team under Juan Carlos Osorio, obviously, you came out of a Gold Cup title that didn't convince anyone. They won the CONCACAF Cup over the United States in a game that really was much more towards Mexico's end of things than the scoreline and the amount of time it took showed, Tom. But JCO, he wasn't exactly the people's choice, I don't think. But everything's going well. What has he brought to the table?
I think what he's brought. Well, I think there's two things. The first one is, and I think the first one is massive, is that he's left out Giovanni Dos Santos. He's left out Carlos Vela. He's left out Guillermo Ochoa. These players who are massive names in Mexican football, and I think that's. You can't overestimate just how huge that is, for the country. And then, you had a kid like Irving Lozano come in against Canada, who's been doing great things over the last, year, 18 months at Pachuca. He's only 20 years old, and he gets the start. And I think that, he's not been afraid to drop those big names because they haven't been playing well. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing is just tactically, I just think he's ahead of some of the managers Mexico have had of late. I think he's ahead of Herrera in terms of tactical awareness, in terms of how to make tweaks to get these results in Honduras. Because let's not forget, he won the first time in Honduras for, I don't know, over 20 years. And then he's won in Canada for the first time since 93. I mean, it's not reaching the World Cup semi-final, but I don't know. I just think he's flexible enough with his tactics, and I think that the Mexican players are in a really good place as well in terms of, you've got a real hardcore group of 5-6 Mexican players who play regularly in Europe, who are playing well for good teams, and who, really importantly, I think are very professional, very mature, and are desperate to get results for this national team. So yeah, that's the positive, and then. Obviously, you've got younger players coming up, which I think we're now seeing with Tecatito Corona, with Irving Lozano. We're seeing the fruit of the labor over the last 10 years of what's gone into Mexican youth systems.
We're seeing, as you said, we're seeing a mix of that new talent, Tecatito Corona, Irving Lozano. We know about Hector Herrera. He's a fixture, maybe one of the best players in the region. Andres Guardado keeps his standard high as he approaches the age of 30, and then you have in the middle still being relied upon, and I suppose this means he's playing well in Mexico. Although I admit that I haven't been checking. Rafa Marquez, just remains the rock. I mean, what is it about Marquez at this point that has not led to him seeing the same fate as Memo Ochoa or any of these other players?
Yeah, actually, Jason, I mean, he's now back playing here in Atlas in Guadalajara, where I live, and I go to all the games, and He's not been playing well at all, Rafa Marquez.
Okay, well, there you go. That's
it's been horrible. I mean, it really has been poor. So, no, I mean, he is relying on his reputation, and I think Juan Carlos Osorio in a press conference the other day, he said, and it's pretty much direct quote. He said, "We're going to squeeze everything we can out of Rafa Marquez while we still have him." And I know he started against Canada the other day, but I don't think he's going to start much longer. I mean, I just don't think it's going to happen. And reading from what Osorio says as well, he's like, it's just so important that we have someone like Rafa Marquez around. I mean, the context is, there's only really Chicharito. You look at Hugo Sanchez and a couple of other Mexican players who have played at that elite level. Champions League, winning the Champions League, winning one of the major leagues in Europe. So that's why he wants him around. He wants him around as that example to set to the younger players of how to be, how to reach the very top of the game. And I think it's that right now more than on the field. And I think when Jonathan Dos Santos comes back from injury, I think when Gallito Vasquez comes back in that holding midfield role, then I think Rafa Marquez's time will be pretty much up. But although he might still get called up.
He did come off at halftime, so it's not as though he is central to everything Osorio is doing. It's just right now he's needed and he's filling a role, and maybe you get away with playing 37-year-old Rafa Marquez in poor form against Canada, where you might not do that against a better country. Certainly this summer, I think we may not see Rafa Marquez play a lot in the Copa America tournament, especially once they reach the knockout rounds. All right, so tactically speaking, Tom, coming back to this, I mean, I'm looking at the report, and I'll admit I didn't watch the game. I was watching the United States fail against Guatemala. So I don't know what Osorio put out there and how it worked out on the field, but it's lined up as a 4-3-3 here in this graphic, and of course we come out of the previous administration, or at least during Herrera's period before there was an interim coach with a system that relied on a 3-man back line and wing backs pushed up the field. How does Mexico deal with, or what is it about Mexico's player pool and the talent that they have that allows them to be flexible to playing a different system? I mean, this looks like a 5-man midfield, but I don't know how high Lozano and Corona are playing. So give me a sense of how that shift has taken shape under Juan Carlos Osorio.
Yeah, I just think, well, in the 3 official games, he's played 3 different formations. So that gives you a sense he is, obviously flexible. I mean, everybody in MLS who watched his teams up there knows that. But I just think it's very attacking. I think it's very focused on the wings. And the difference with Herrera is Herrera, obviously, like you're saying, Jason, used the wing backs. Osorio's, in every game he's played so far, he's used obviously the fullback and then the winger, but the fullback is extremely high up. And I just think for when you play CONCACAF teams that are just parking the bus, basically, it really helps. It's almost overloading the opposition half and giving the players so many options on the ball. And I think there's a difference between the formation and the style of play, because and Osorio said this as well. I don't think there's much difference between the style of play. I think Mexico's style of play is pretty set. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we know what it is. It's high energy, technically very, very good. Fast attacking football. I mean, I just think that's the DNA that most Mexican players are brought up with in the clubs. Is you watch the Liga MX League week in, week out, and I mean, I think there's a negative side to this as well. But there's hardly any team that will be ultra defensive and just sit there on the edge of the box. I mean, I think that Mexico, you could argue, struggle because they're only used to playing in that way, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But yeah, I mean that's what Osorio's done, and I think he's flexible tactically to change things up, to change things from he's used a back 5 against Honduras, he's used I'd call it a 4-2-4 against El Salvador at home, and then a 4-3-3 against Canada the other day. So, it's fun.
Let's talk. We're talking about the youth in this team, the situation with Corona and Lozano. Obviously, Chicharito Hernandez went through a very rough period Tom, where it wasn't working for him in his club situation. It was reflected in his national team fortunes. He was benched for a while, if I remember correctly. He simply couldn't buy a goal for Mexico, and everything has come back for him, and that's partly due to finding a good club situation in Germany. What does it say about Chicharito Hernandez that he has managed to recapture that form and start to meet that expectation?
No, yeah, I think obviously, if you speak to anybody who's known Chicharito here in Guadalajara at Chivas, at his first club, then everybody stresses is the mental side of his game. I mean, everybody knows Chicharito is brought up in a family of footballers. His dad played for Mexico. His granddad played for Mexico. I mean, he's got that mental strength, and that's taken him a long way combined with his talent. But I mean, for me, it's not been any surprise at all that he's got back to that form, because he's a very good player. I mean, he's not Messi or Ronaldo, but he's a very good player, and if you back him, and I feel Miguel Herrera really made a mistake by not backing Chicharito when he wasn't necessarily getting minutes. I just think he's that important to Mexico that, when you spoke to people outside of Mexico about the last World Cup, when Oribe Peralta was starting ahead of Chicharito, like, nobody could really believe it. They were like, "Oh, who's this Peralta guy, and why is Chicharito not playing?" So I think Osorio's the type who is gonna give a lot of he's gonna rely a lot on Chicharito because of what he's achieved, because he's what he's doing in Europe. And I think he's gonna be an absolute fix. I just, even if he's not playing so well in Europe, I just can't see him being moved from that spot now.
Mexico on 9 points, top of Group A, as you might expect. Obviously, it's not the easiest group. The United States actually has the easiest group, and it may not even be the toughest group. Costa Rica, Panama, Jamaica, and a growing into themselves Haitian team in Group B. Mexico tonight against Canada. No expectations that they shouldn't handle things against the Canadians at home, Tom. But what will Osorio be trying to accomplish in this game? How do you think he'll approach it, knowing that they are free and clear at the top?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting, because obviously he likes to tinker, and he was saying yesterday he's going to make some changes. So I think we're going to see Raul Jimenez. Rafa Marquez definitely not going to be involved. I think the goalkeeper is going to change. I think it's probably going to be Jesus Corona instead of Talavera. So yeah, and I imagine it's going to be another 4-3-3. It wouldn't surprise me if he kind of now pulled back Irving Lozano after a brilliant performance by him on last Friday. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing, and this is actually quite interesting. When the day before games or the morning before games, we don't know anymore the team. The Mexico team. I mean, the Mexican journalists are always trying to guess and have a look at what we've seen in the last 10 minutes in training. And then the team sheet comes through and they've not even got the formation right. I mean, it's it's completely different from the Herrera regime where he'd just come out and tell his team.
Piojo spoiled you guys. Absolutely spoiled you guys. Tom, one of the things that has been notable with the Mexican talent recently has been I mean, it's long been a talking point within Mexican football, and obviously in North America that the talent hasn't moved to Europe on a level that seems commensurate with what we have. And certainly Mexico has produced a lot more talented footballers than the United States, and it has been not difficult, but it's been a hit and miss thing. For every Hugo Sanchez, there's a player who goes over and doesn't find himself there. Are we seeing a new dawn of first of all, European clubs recognizing what kind of wealth of talent there is in Mexico, and then Mexican players actually adjusting well?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if we've seen it yet, but if I was to make a prediction, I'd say in the next 5-10 years, then we will see it. I think we're going to see more players moving to Europe. I mean, the problem with Mexican players is that they cost a lot of money because Mexican clubs pay them really well. So obviously the transfer fee is quite big, but aside from that, the wages are big. So it happens, but it's difficult for a Mexican player to go from here to PSV or a Dutch club or a Portuguese club that isn't Porto, or Benfica. So it's difficult for them to jump to that middle league and then up, unless they take a pay cut, unless the contract's out and you know what I mean? So it's difficult, but I think more than anything, what we're going to see in the next few years is players like Lozano, Eric Gutierrez at Pachuca, Rodolfo Pizarro, Obilin Pineda. I think these players have been in the national team setup so long now, and they're only around 20 years old, but they've played in Europe with with youth national teams. They've been to Asia, they've been to South America. They're like they're much more mature for their age than previous generations of Mexican players. They've been brought up in very good youth systems that treat the players properly, that teach them properly. So I think we're just going to see a kind of new breed now of Mexican player that is a result of the work that's gone in over the last 10 years in the youth system. And I think that's a real positive for Mexico, and it's going to be fascinating to see when they do go to Europe and how much and stuff like that. But yeah, I think we're going to see a good few more players in the next couple of years.
Very briefly here before I get let you go, Tom. Marco Fabian landing in Germany as well. Sort of, I'm not sure following Chicharito is the right phrasing, but an opportunity for Fabian to do something in Europe. How has things gone at Eintracht Frankfurt so far?
Not the best. I mean, I think he's been okay, but Eintracht Frankfurt is really struggling with relegation. So, Fabian's deal was interesting because he just basically, I think he had an agreement with the Chivas owner because he was so desperate to go to Europe. And for me, he was a player who should have gone right after the Olympics because he needed that kind of the discipline that would have been instilled in him. So, yeah, it's going to be. Yeah, we'll see what happens with Fabian, especially if they go down, because you can imagine, if they go down, then where's he going to end up after that? But yeah, and then obviously with the other transfers, I think Carlos Vela. Let's see what he happens. Obviously the MLS rumors are not going anywhere, and he's obviously struggled in the last couple of weeks with Real Sociedad with a few disciplinary problems. So he looks like he's going somewhere, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he ends up at MLS this summer.
Tom Marshall, Mexico World Cup on Twitter. You should be following him. If you're not, I don't know what's wrong with you. And also check out the Mexican Soccer Show, which is confusing as hell, but hey, whatever. Just kidding, Tom. It's good stuff. Also, Tom's work's all over the place, ESPN FC and others. Tom, thank you very much for the time. I got to run, but we'll be talking to you throughout the qualifying campaign. Certainly some league stuff as well soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Much appreciated.
There goes Tom Marshall. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We're going to have a little bit of time for phone calls, and then we'll wrap up this edition of Soccer Morning on a Tuesday. Be right back. SoccerMorningBackHeel.com.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we're back on a Tuesday edition of Soccer Morning. We've already killed it with two very good guests today. Thank you very much to Neil Morris and Tom Marshall. Phone lines are open for a brief period of time here because we did have two very good guests. 646-832-3909. Look, if these calls aren't going to be about the U.S. men's national team tonight, I'll be very surprised. We are in a situation after that game in Guatemala and the 2-0 loss and the two major mistakes that impacted that game, put the United States behind Guatemala 2 goals inside the 15 minutes. We're in a situation now where the response is needed. And I think the response mostly is expected. Now, I'm actually more interested because I do believe that the United States will win this game tonight and everything will not be good, but they'll certainly be back on track to qualify for the Hex. I'm more interested in sort of how people feel about this team right now. Because if you are emotionally invested in any sports team whatsoever and your team starts to lose or looks like it's being managed poorly, I think the natural response is anger. The natural response is upset and angst and frustration, and it comes out in a passionate sort of explosion of all of that emotion. And I think, for the most part, and this has been true of the U.S. men's national team fan base is weird to begin with, and I put myself in this group. I'm not casting any stones here. But I think in this particular case, what we've got is a fan base that is pretty much just throwing up their hands. What you gonna do? We suck. What are you gonna do? And I think that some people have placed that blame for we suck on Jurgen Klinsmann, and some people have placed that we suck blame on the player pool. And basically, the only thing that we can all totally agree on is that we're all very disillusioned with this program. I mean, is that fair? Whether you want to say that Jurgen Klinsmann deserves the blame or flat out we don't have the players to compete, the bottom line, the end of the day, to use every cliche in the book, is that we are all united in our whatever, frustration, disillusion. I wouldn't even say disgust, because disgust rises to the level of passion. I think that we are dealing with a team that has treated us, for lack of a better way of saying it, so poorly that now we don't even want to put ourselves in a position to be hurt again. I mean, I know now it sounds like love line, but that's kind of where we are, I think. We have emotionally walled ourselves off. U.S. national team fans, this is one of the major traits of this group. And again, I'm in this group. The snark, the attitude, the self-loathing, the inferiority complex, it is all meant to insulate ourselves from the pain of coming up short of our expectations or losing games we shouldn't lose or losing games, period. That's where we are as a soccer country. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left here. So jump on in, 646-832-39. I'm pulling out dime store psychology on this, and I know that's terrible. They're going to win tonight. They are. They're going to be fine. I mean, not fine overall, but fine tonight. Roberto in Connecticut, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm working through some stuff, Roberto.
I understand. No, I understand. And tonight's obviously going to be one nervy ride for all of us American fans.
Yeah, I believe so. Roberto, you got multiple teams. You're good.
Only 2 countries, that's all.
I know, but it's Paraguay, right?
Right, but they're playing Brazil, a 5-time world champion.
They're gonna totally beat Brazil just because you deserve it, Roberto. What else is on your mind?
That's basically it. No, about the U.S. side, we've talked about this a lot, and we've seen how the United States has been ever since the World Cup. Do you think that we're just, giving them a bit too much after the World Cup and so much, hype? I don't want to say that word, but it's the one that comes out of my mind.
No, we're not hyping up a team that doesn't deserve to be hyped. We're not doing that. I think that, one of the hardest parts about being a fan of soccer in the United States is trying to figure out how we're supposed to feel about our leagues and our teams, national, club, whatever. Are we supposed to be proud of them and excited and think there's a lot of potential, or does that make us look like we're rubes because obviously we're not the best among the best in the world? Should we underrate our team? Should we downplay our team? Should we talk crap about our own teams so that we can look better to the people who poo-poo American soccer? Or, is there a happy medium? I think that's kind of where we are with this. This national team has always been a difficult path to try to figure out how we're supposed to feel about them, even when they're good or better than this, Roberto.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I just feel that people are just overreacting after Friday night loss. Obviously, it's a big loss because, it's Guatemala. It's not considered one of the powerhouses of CONCACAF, and they're beating a powerhouse of CONCACAF, which is the United States. But I feel that if we win tonight, which we most certainly will, but there's doubts, but obviously this is all going to be forgotten, and we'll be back on the path and out of the crisis.
It's not going to be, well, I don't know about that, Roberto. I don't know about forgotten. I got to run, man. Appreciate the call, Roberto up in Connecticut. One more, we'll get on the air before I have to run. Jared in Pennsylvania, you're up. What's up?
Hey, Jason, I feel pretty terrible right now about this team. I mean, there have been past years where we've been in Central America and we've lost games where, somebody hits a free kick in the 88th minute to either tie us or clip us and beat us. At no point Friday night watching that game did I think we were going to win, except for maybe that 3-minute flurry where we had a couple shots.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I kind of had a weird out-of-body experience watching that game. I mean, I had to work it. I had to write about it a little bit. And when I do that, I'm not as emotionally invested. Although I think the second half, things ticked up a notch. I mean, I don't think I made a peep when Guatemala scored. I just kind of went, oh, okay, let's deal with that. And then the second half came around, and there were a couple of opportunities. Alejandro Bedoya, takes shots that go right into the gut of the Guatemalan keeper. There were a couple of, obviously, you stuff like Gyasi Zardes in his first touch, and you're just like, you want to pull your hair out. And by the end of the game, I was just, again, throwing up my hands like, okay, well, I mean, this is where we are. And okay, whether or not Jurgen Klinsmann is the worst coach of all time, that's not really my argument, but I do think that there has been a slow eroding of our expectations under Jurgen Klinsmann, and that maybe that just coincides with a failure of the player pool, I suppose, but it still remains true that this team in this iteration has underwhelmed.
And the previous caller kind of scares me about the general outlook of the soccer fan base. If we win tonight, I don't know that I feel much better unless we come out and it's 4 or 5-0. I mean, if we win 1-0 on a late free kick or something like that, and then we have obviously we'll have Copa America. But
look,
with the way that the qualifying falls, it's kind of like we get 3 points tonight and then we don't play again until September. But there's definitely major concerns and just the overall tone deafness of Klinsmann.
Regardless what happens tonight. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Tone deafness on Glidden.
I was just saying the overall tone deafness of Klinsmann when he'll either blame the refs or he'll say he's still not playing people out of position. And
well, he has a tendency to say that the players need to respond, the players this, the players that, and again, there's whether or not that's true. It's certainly, thanks for the call, Jared. I got to run. Whether or not it's true that the players need to respond, and in a lot of cases it is true, 100%. His job, as manager, as head coach, is to take some of that responsibility. I mean, the management position is not just about tactics or lineups. It's about the psychological side of the all of those other things. Anyway, and look, we'll see what happens tonight. Things won't be better tomorrow morning if they win necessarily for the outlook of the team, but they will be better in terms of World Cup qualifying, and we'll have an interesting summer. Let's wrap this up. Again, thanks to Neil Morris, thanks to Tom Marshall, thank you to the two guys who got in on calls. Thank you for listening to Soccer Morning. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll find out what happens. U.S. senior team, U23s, lots more. See you then. Bye.